Hey, I'm Rauscher, a sound designer, technical sound designer, and music producer. I recently finished working on Bora and want to talk about the process of creating and implementing audio. Bora uses Unreal Engine 5.3 and Audiokinetics Wwise, so I've broken up this video into 3 sections: creating the audio, integration in Wwise, and implementation in Unreal Engine. Bora is a first-person horror RPG where you play as Eleanor, the newly appointed lighthouse keeper on a remote, secluded island. Your duties involve maintaining the lighthouse's beacon, recording unusual occurrences, and keeping yourself safe. Since this is a horror game, I chose to write the music in 7/8 at 112 beats per minute. I wanted the music to feel slow, scary, and uneasy. The main menu music is built around a low 2-note progression between D and C sharp. When building out the rest of the track, I knew that I wanted to randomly trigger additional elements in Wwise, so I added these claps, whispers, this pluck with a ton of reverb, string chatter, and some more background effects to make it feel like you're being watched. When writing the second piece, I focused on dissonant half-step intervals that climb in pitch and never resolve. I used some toy bells because they felt creepy, and to keep things tonally consistent, I used the low piano, claps, string chatter, and pluck synth from the main menu. I also added in the string sliding up, and some taiko drums with some reverb. I built out 3 other sections of the same melody with varying intensities. But we didn't end up fitting them in. The cult chant was fun to make. It centers around these tight but big taiko drums. Then there's a dulcimer tremolo, some cult voices, strings sliding down, and this guy who sounds like he needs to sneeze. I thought it would be cool for this chant to have some tribal inhales and exhales, so I recorded myself breathing into the mic and processed it. The final touches are these other staccato stabs. Alright, on to the sound effects. I'm not going to go through everything, but I did want to share some of the things that I found interesting. I regularly found myself using convolution reverb to make things feel more physical, natural, and real. For example, here's a moment where one of the cult members is running out of the lighthouse and slams the door on their exit. Without the convolver, it sounds okay. But with the convolver, it sounds like someone's really there. Here are some other examples with the convolver. The Eldritch Abomination sound was another fun one. The idea is that at the end of the game, you're sacrificed by the cult to the Eldritch Abomination. This creature lives in the sea and only comes out when it's summoned. So to make the sound, I pitched down various recordings of animals, myself, waves, and other creepy material. The final result feels gurgly, full, and intimidating. For the voiceovers, we had 2 talented voice actresses, Tracy Redmond and Rachel Adkins. The raw recordings they gave me off the bat were great.
That's a lot of fuses for a 1-month supply.
Tracy played the part of Eleanor, and for her recordings, I added some compression,
That's a lot of fuses.
de-essing,
That's a lot of fuses.
EQ,
That's a lot of fuses.
and a limiter set to have a maximum output of -6 dB.
That's a lot of fuses for a 1-month supply.
Rachel played the part of the other lighthouse keeper on a nearby island and only communicated through the radio. So I started off by adding some movement to her voice with some mishby and a frequency shifter.
Lighthouse, what is your position?
Then I used the following signal flow to make it sound like she was speaking through a radio: EQ, saturation, compression, saturation, and limiting.
Lighthouse, what is your position? We can't see you.
To help enhance the idea that this was coming through a radio, I added some vinyl crackle and these radio static cuts.
Lighthouse, what is your position? We can't see you.
I'm not a voice actor, but I had fun making this horror VO rack and recording a couple lines.
Macaroni. Macaroni. You shouldn't be here.
The UI sounds were designed in 2 sessions. During the first session, I made a bunch of random spooky horror sounds with labs. I resampled all this audio, threw it into Quanta, and got this. From here, I just cut out some clicks, beeps, and boops that I found interesting and added some disperser for UI zappiness. For the second session, I used a Geiger counter with some disperser to make some zappy clicks. Onto the Wwise project. The bus structure is set up with a parent master bus and children ambient, music, NPC, player, UI, and VO buses. These buses are set up with RTPCs that control their volume. In the actor mixer hierarchy, I created work units and actor mixers for the ambient, player locomotion, sound effects, user interface, and voiceover sounds. These mixes are sent to their respective buses, but I wanted my sound effects to be position accurate, so I set its listener relative routing to position. The waves crashing and fishing boat are similarly set, but have position and attenuation routing. That way they'll play at dynamic volumes based on players' distance to the emitter. On the topic of attenuations, I set up generic attenuations ranging from 10 to 4,000 meters. Player footsteps are set up with a parent switch container that houses random containers for each material type. In a separate container, I added cloth sweeteners. These random containers have volume and pitch automation to add variation. In the Game Syncs tab, I made a switch group with all the material types as switches. Back in the switch container, I assigned each random container to its correlated switch. To wrap this up, I made a footstep event with the footstep switch and the cloth sweetener. Most of the sound effects are straightforward. The knockout sound is linked to the play knockout event, the fire burning sound is linked to the play fire burning event, etc. The UI and voiceover sounds are set up the same way. In the interactive music hierarchy, I made a folder for stingers, a switch for the cult music, a switch for the main theme called They're Coming, and a couple of playlist containers with the main menu music. The cult switch is set up with two playlist containers, one to play the chant, and another with a taiko transition to stop the chant. These playlist containers are set up to loop infinitely. I made two switches for play and stop in the Game Syncs tab and assigned the corresponding playlist container to its switch. The They're Coming switch group has 6 playlist containers called Build Tension, End, Intense, Raya No, Stop Music, and Tense. The same process here with the playlist containers and switch configuration. I set up some triggers in the Game Syncs tab. These triggers are used in the Transitions tab of the Cult Music switch and the They're Coming switch. I set it up so that this crash symbol plays on the transitions between one switch setting to another. To test that my configurations worked, I opened up a Soundcaster session and tried different switch settings. To Unreal Engine. The footsteps are set up in the first-person character blueprint and are triggered with this footstep queue custom event. When the custom event is called, I run a line trace by channel to get the surface type and set a switch on ePhysical surface. I then use this ePhysical surface switch to set the corresponding footstep switch and post the event. Throughout Bora, we use trigger boxes and overlap events to determine when a sound should play. For example, the first overlap event occurs when you enter the trigger box at the bottom of the steps. The name of this trigger box is triggerbox_ICU. To make this work in blueprints, I got the onEventBegin overlap, cast to the first person character, set it so the sequence only happens once, played a custom event called Voices, which just stops the player movement and adds a vignette, and then posted my event at a location. I didn't want the player to hear the event at the location of the box, so I set up this capsule between these two rock walls. Then I used a reference to the capsule, got its location, and plugged that into the location of the post event. This was the main workflow in Unreal, but we couldn't have all of the trigger boxes enabled on EventBeginPlay because then the player would overlap with some too early. To fix this issue, we disabled collision on all of the boxes we wanted to play later in the story. Then, to enable collisions, we go to the point in the story where the overlap event should play and enable collision. For example, the cult music chant is triggered on the overlap event of triggerbox_play_cult_music. At the beginning of the game, the trigger is disabled, but once we write the data report with desk event 2, we set the trigger box collisions to enabled. The weather effects in Ultra Dynamic Sky sounded great straight out of the box, so I stuck with those. The last thing that I want to talk about is this spline that I used to play the waves crashing sound effect. On EventBeginPlay, I cast the first person character, trigger the Move Audio custom event, and post the waves crashing event. The Move Audio event finds the point closest from the spline to the character and updates it every 500th of a second. Since we have position and attenuation set up in Wwise, we get dynamic, positionally accurate waves. If you're interested in the game and want to check it out, it's in the description below. I hope you enjoyed. Peace.